And a truly heartbreaking story. Police say a Bellingham woman murdered her boyfriend's 3-year-old daughter.
What?
After 20 years in law enforcement, a detective in Bellingham, Washington had seen almost everything. Violence, neglect, cases that stayed with him long after the reports were filed. It had all, in some way, become part of the job. But nothing prepared him for this. On a cold morning in November 2019, Detective Brandon Homan sat in silence, looking at photos and videos of his daughter. At first, he couldn't speak. Later, in court, even experienced officers, people who had spent decades investigating the worst kinds of crimes, looked away when the evidence appeared on the screen. This was not just another case. This was his child. The city of Bellingham, a quiet community in Washington state, would come to remember the name of a little girl with large brown eyes and round glasses. Her name was Hazel Homan. Her story is not only a tragedy, it is also a case study in how systems designed to protect children can fail, sometimes not because no one saw the warning signs, but because too many people assumed someone else would act. March 13th, 2016. Shelton, Washington. That was the day Hazel was born. Her father, Brandon Homan, held her in his arms for the first time in the maternity ward. The moment was not simple or calm. Hazel was born blue, struggling to breathe. Doctors rushed to intervene. For a brief moment, everything was uncertain. Then her first cry broke through the room. And in that moment, her father made a promise to protect her. As she grew, Hazel developed into a child who stood out immediately. She had long chestnut hair, wide brown eyes, and wore round glasses that gave her a distinctive, almost owl-like appearance. Her family gave her a nickname. They called her Hazel Bug. It fit her perfectly. She didn't walk through life. She ran, always moving, always curious, as if she was afraid of missing something important. Every morning followed the same quiet ritual. Hazel would wake up before anyone else, sneak into her father's room, and whisper softly, "Daddy, time to wake up." Those early moments, before the rest of the world came in, belonged only to them. In the kitchen, she would ask for her favorite food. Chicken nuggets, even for breakfast, dipped in ketchup. But what people remembered most about Hazel was not just her energy, it was her empathy. She seemed to sense emotions in others almost instinctively. If someone looked upset, she would notice immediately. She would climb onto their lap, sit quietly and hum to them. Her grandmother, Tammy Mortensen, would later say that this ability, to feel what others were feeling, was what made Hazel different. With other children, she naturally took the lead. She organized games, made sure no one felt left out. She spent hours outside in the garden, studying flowers and butterflies, collecting small treasures, leaves, stones, even earthworms, and proudly bringing them back as gifts. Like many children her age, she dreamed in simple but beautiful ways. Sometimes she wanted to become a veterinarian, helping animals. Other times she imagined herself as a princess, like Elsa, living in a world made of ice and magic. But behind those moments of childhood, there was instability. Hazel's life, from the beginning, was shaped by the difficulties surrounding her parents. Her mother, Medora, was just 17 years old when Hazel was born. Her father, Brandon Homan, was 26. Both struggled with serious challenges. There were issues related to dependency, emotional instability, and an inability to maintain a consistent, safe environment. Brandon had a history that included arrests related to public disturbances and property-related offenses. Despite that, those who knew him did not question that he loved his daughter. But love alone does not always create stability, and stability is what children depend on most. On November 2nd, 2017, when Hazel was just 19 months old, an incident occurred that would change the course of her life. That day, Brandon and Medora were inside an apartment on Queen Street in Bellingham. An argument between them escalated. Concerned relatives contacted the police. When officers arrived, Brandon refused to open the door. He also refused to allow Medora to leave the apartment. What followed was a tense standoff that lasted for several hours. Eventually, law enforcement intervened. Brandon was detained on suspicion of criminal behavior. Inside that apartment during the entire incident was Hazel, a 19-month-old child, present in the middle of a volatile and unpredictable situation. After the incident, Child Protective Services, CPS, stepped in. Hazel was removed from the home. She was placed with her paternal grandparents, Tammy and Dale Mortensen, who lived in Olympia, Washington. According to family accounts, CPS required the grandparents to sign an agreement acknowledging that the agency would retain full authority over decisions regarding Hazel's future, including whether and when she could be returned to her parents. When Hazel arrived at her grandparents' home, there were signs that something had already been wrong. She had health concerns, including dental issues believed to be linked to inadequate care. She woke up at night frightened, anxious, unsettled. Tammy and Dale began rebuilding her sense of safety. They took her to doctors and dentists. They stayed up with her through the night when she woke up scared. They created an environment that was calm, stable, and predictable. Over time, the change was visible. Hazel began to thrive. She became the version of herself that people would later remember most clearly. A happy, curious, emotionally open child. For 1 year and 7 months, she lived in that environment. And during that time, she flourished. Meanwhile, her parents were given a clear path. If they wanted Hazel returned to their care, they had to meet specific conditions. They were required to complete substance dependency treatment, attend parenting classes, undergo psychological counseling, demonstrate the ability to provide a safe and stable home. These steps are standard in reunification cases. They are designed to ensure that when a child returns home, the risks that led to removal have been addressed. But not every parent completes that process successfully. According to available information, Medora did not complete the required program. Unlike Medora, who gradually withdrew from the process, Brandon Homan began making visible efforts toward reunification. Records show that Medora missed required meetings, stopped participating in programs after the initial stages, and failed to attend scheduled visits with her daughter, even when transportation was arranged and paid for by the department. By the fall of 2018, she had moved to Iowa to live with her own mother and no longer maintained consistent contact with Hazel. Brandon's trajectory moved in the opposite direction. Around that time, a new person entered his life, Kami Dixon. According to case records and testimony, Dixon played an active role in encouraging Brandon to comply with court requirements and pursue reunification with his daughter. Despite having her own past legal issues, including property-related offenses and violations of court procedures, she underwent a background review. Authorities required her to meet specific conditions, participation in rehabilitation programs, and securing employment. When she completed those requirements, she was permitted to be present during supervised visits between Brandon and Hazel. In December 2018, Child Services held a formal meeting to determine Hazel's long-term placement. At that point, Brandon appeared to be the stronger candidate for reunification. He had secured stable employment, maintained housing, attended parenting classes, complied with requirements set by his probation officer. After a home check in February 2019, Hazel's visits with her father were expanded to include weekend stays with overnight visits. Gradually, the system began moving toward reunification. Although Kami Dixon technically maintained her own apartment in Bellingham, records and testimony later indicated that she spent most of her time at Brandon's residence, effectively becoming part of Hazel's daily environment. On June 19, 2019, the decision was made to begin a trial reunification. After nearly 2 years of living with her grandparents, Hazel returned to live with her father. That same day, Dixon posted photos on social media. The images showed Hazel's new bedroom, decorated in soft pink and gold tones, with Disney princesses covering the walls. The room appeared carefully arranged, almost staged, reflecting a picture of comfort and care. In the weeks that followed, her social media accounts filled with images of what appeared to be a happy family. Hazel smiling, playing, sleeping with stuffed animals, dressed in bright, carefully chosen outfits. From the outside, everything looked stable, even ideal. But the daily reality inside the home depended heavily on one factor. Brandon worked 6 days a week, often 2 hours away from home. During those hours, the primary caregiver for Hazel became Cami Dixon. On paper, the situation met the required standards: a parent with employment, a home environment that appeared stable, a child enrolled in daycare, a secondary caregiver who had passed basic checks, the assigned social worker, who was expected to conduct twice-monthly visits due to Hazel's age, continued to receive routine updates. House conditions: acceptable. Food supply: sufficient. Child attendance: documented. Everything appeared to meet the minimum criteria. But within weeks of reunification, warning signs began to surface. The first documented concerns appeared in early August 2019, less than 2 months after Hazel returned home. On August 3rd, relatives who were caring for Hazel over the weekend noticed unusual marks on her arms, dark pink discolorations that did not resemble typical childhood bruises. They photographed the injuries, and they reported it immediately to Child Protective Services. The response followed standard procedure. A visit would be scheduled, but not immediately. Days passed. Hazel remained in the same environment, and the situation continued. Around the same time, a friend of Cami Dixon, identified in testimony as Autumn, witnessed an incident that deeply disturbed her. She intervened in the moment and stopped what was happening. But afterward, she hesitated. She questioned whether what she had seen was serious enough to report. It did not fit the clear, unmistakable image of abuse. It was unsettling, but ambiguous. And so, she said nothing. Her silence would later become part of the case record. By September 2019, concerns extended beyond the home. Staff at Hazel's daycare began noticing changes in her behavior. The previously energetic social child had become quiet and withdrawn. She appeared less engaged, more reserved. Educators followed protocol and contacted the reporting hotline, but the case did not move smoothly. Due to staff rotation and workload distribution, it was transferred between multiple social workers. No single person had full visibility of the accumulating concerns. Each report existed in isolation. At the same time, another pattern began to emerge. Hazel started missing daycare frequently, often with explanations related to illness. However, records showed that Cami Dixon's own child, living in the same environment, continued attending daycare without interruption. The discrepancy was noted, but it was not escalated. Toward the end of September, another incident was reported. Brandon mentioned to a social worker that Hazel had burned herself on a hot stove approximately a week earlier. No medical care had been provided at the time. According to his explanation, Dixon had attempted to seek treatment, but was unable to proceed due to issues related to legal guardianship. The explanation raised questions, but it did not trigger an urgent response. When Hazel was eventually examined by a doctor on October 3rd, medical staff made a decision. The child required further evaluation at a specialized clinic in Seattle. Medical professionals notified Child Protective Services, but instead of assigning a specialized investigator, the case remained with a standard social worker, one who was already handling more than 20 other cases. On October 15th, Hazel was hospitalized again. This time, the issue involved an eye injury. Brandon explained that the child had been playing with cosmetics. But when doctors examined her, the explanation did not fully align with the injury. There were concerns, questions. The following day, a social worker visited the home. She confirmed that hazardous substances were now out of reach. She documented the visit. But key questions were not explored. How had a 3-year-old gained access to such items, twice in 2 weeks? Why were these incidents repeating? In November, another concern appeared. On November 13th, Brandon reported that Hazel was experiencing hair loss. He attributed it to stress. Hair loss in a young child can indicate prolonged distress, trauma, or medical issues. But the report was recorded without escalation. The case moved forward. By that point, the system had received multiple signals: reports from relatives, concerns from daycare staff, medical observations, documented injuries, behavioral changes. But each piece of information was processed independently. No one assembled the full picture. Agencies did not effectively communicate. Case responsibility shifted between workers. Documentation accumulated, but insight did not. Meanwhile, the person acting as Hazel's primary caregiver, Kami Dixon, was never subjected to a comprehensive, in-depth evaluation of her behavior or parenting methods. No extended observation, no focused assessment, no intervention. On the surface, the system was functioning. Forms were completed, visits were scheduled, reports were filed. But beneath that structure, something critical was missing: connection, context, urgency. And while that gap remained, the situation inside the home continued to deteriorate. At the same time, on social media, the image remained unchanged. A smiling child, a loving home, a perfect family. Throughout the summer and fall of 2019, Kami Dixon's social media presented a carefully constructed image. It was the image of a devoted mother. Her profile was filled with bright, carefully framed photos of Hazel, wearing pink dresses, smiling, playing with toys, dancing in the car. Each image was paired with emotional captions describing love, connection, and family. In September, Dixon published a longer post. In it, she wrote that she did not distinguish between biological and stepchildren. According to her, Hazel was just as much her child. The photos supported that narrative. Warm hugs, smiling faces, moments that suggested closeness, stability, and affection. From the outside, everything appeared genuine. But alongside those public images, private messages told a different story. In conversations recovered from her phone, Dixon described ordinary behavior from a 3-year-old child in unusual terms. When her friend Autumn mentioned a typical situation involving a young child, Dixon responded by interpreting the behavior as intentional and directed against her. What would normally be seen as developmentally typical actions, impulsivity, emotional reactions, testing boundaries, were instead described as deliberate acts. Later, experts would identify this pattern as projection, a psychological response in which an adult assigns intent or hostility to a child's normal behavior. In the context of caregiving, this can become a warning sign. In October, Dixon posted another video. Hazel appeared smiling, engaged, and playful. The caption reinforced the same message: "This is my child." But behind that image, another pattern continued. Hazel was missing daycare repeatedly. The discrepancy between the public image and daily reality was growing. On Halloween, Dixon created one of the most striking posts. She dressed as Cruella de Vil. Brandon appeared as her accomplice. The children were dressed as puppies. The photos were visually striking, coordinated, theatrical, and memorable. To anyone viewing them, it looked like a joyful, creative family moment. But in retrospect, those images became something else, a contrast. Because within weeks, Hazel would no longer be alive. Experts later noted that this type of contrast is not uncommon in cases involving hidden abuse. Public-facing behavior often becomes more polished, more expressive, as if reinforcing a version of reality that does not exist behind closed doors. Each post becomes part of a narrative that reassures others, and in some cases, deflects suspicion. Even social workers saw only part of that picture. During scheduled visits, they observed a clean home, toys in place, a child who appeared physically present and accounted for. But they did not have access to the text messages. They did not see the private interactions. They did not have the full context of what was happening inside the home. On November 27, 2019, the situation reached its final and irreversible point. It was the morning after Thanksgiving. Brandon left for work. Hazel remained in the care of Kami Dixon. According to routine, Hazel was supposed to attend daycare that day. Instead, Dixon brought her back to her apartment in Bellingham. At approximately 10:30 a.m., Dixon called emergency services. She used a neighbor's phone. Her own phone was not available. Her voice was described as panicked. She reported that Hazel had choked on food and was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, the situation was already critical. Hazel was unconscious. Emergency responders immediately began resuscitation efforts. She was transported first to St. Joseph Medical Center, then transferred to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, a facility equipped to handle severe pediatric trauma. As doctors began evaluating her condition, questions emerged. The clinical findings did not align with the explanation of choking. Medical evidence suggested that the child's condition was not the result of a sudden, isolated event that morning. Instead, it indicated a process that had developed over time. On November 30th, 3 days after she was hospitalized, doctors confirmed that Hazel had suffered irreversible brain damage. She was 3 years old. Her condition was sustained through life support systems for several more days. On December 4th, 2019, those systems were withdrawn. Hazel Journey Homan died just weeks before her 4th birthday. Only months earlier, she had been returned to her father's care under supervision from the very system designed to protect her. Now, that same system was left to explain how it had failed. On December 5th, Kami Dixon was arrested. She was charged under Washington state law with criminal mistreatment resulting in great bodily harm, a charge tied to the failure of a caregiver to provide necessary care, leading to severe injury or death. One detail stood out to the public. Brandon Homan was not charged. He was not taken into custody. Instead, he spoke publicly. In statements given shortly after Hazel's death, he defended Dixon. He said that those closest to them understood what kind of person she was, that she loved the children, that she had not intended harm. He acknowledged that he had questions about what had happened, but he urged others not to assign blame prematurely. At the same time, he expressed something that every parent in that position faces: grief, confusion, and the need for answers. Outside the home where Hazel had lived, people began leaving flowers, toys, and small tributes, items that reflected the life she had lived, things she would have recognized, things she loved. The trial of Kami Dixon began in April 2022, nearly 2.5 years after Hazel's death. Prosecutors presented a detailed reconstruction of the final months of Hazel's life. Among the most important pieces of evidence were Dixon's own text messages, which revealed patterns in her thinking and behavior. Autumn, the friend who had once witnessed a troubling incident, testified in court. She described what she had seen, why she had intervened in that moment, and why she ultimately hesitated to report it further. She also recalled another situation, an event where Dixon became visibly upset when attention was directed toward Hazel. The atmosphere shifted, and they left early. Each piece of testimony added another layer to the same conclusion. The signs had been there, seen by multiple people, documented in different places, but never fully connected in time. During the trial, medical experts presented their findings. Their conclusions were clear. The evidence did not support the explanation of a sudden, accidental choking incident. Instead, the data pointed to a condition that had developed over time, one that could not be explained by a single event on the morning of November 27th. Despite this, Kami Dixon maintained her version of events. She took the stand in her own defense. Calm at times, uncertain at others, she described the moment she said she found Hazel unresponsive. According to her testimony, she saw the child slumped against the couch. She said she panicked. She described uncertainty, what to do, whether to perform CPR, how to respond in a moment she claimed she was not prepared for. She told the jury she was not medically trained, that she wished she had known what to do.
I looked over at Hazel and she was slumped up against the couch.
What did you do at that point?
I didn't know what was going on. I knew something was very, very wrong when I looked at Hazel. It was like the lights in her eyes were off.
Dixon claims Hazel was choking and immediately tended to her. She said the child had locked jaw, so Dixon opened her mouth and scooped out food. Dixon says the 3-year-old still wasn't breathing after that.
I remember grabbing her body and throwing it over my arm and pounding on her back, thinking maybe some food would come up or something. That didn't help. So then I'm like, well, what do? Do I do CPR? So I am not a medical professional. I'm not trained, and I wish that I would have been, but I figured if she wasn't choking, then she needed some CPR. So I began to do CPR.
Dixon tells the court Hazel was still unresponsive after she attempted CPR. She says she grabbed the child in her arms and ran out of her apartment, banging on the doors of her neighbors until someone opened up. Dixon says she used that neighbor's cell phone to call 911, and paramedics arrived shortly after. Hazel is the daughter of Brandon Homan, Dixon's boyfriend. The child was in Dixon's care while Homan went to work.
Since Hazel's death, this is a moment of the 3-year-old that her grandfather has replayed over and over.
I just don't understand how anybody could hurt her. When I hear her say not guilty with no look on her face, it infuriates me.
Dixon's attorney releasing this statement to Q13 News. The shaken baby syndrome diagnosis has been under scrutiny over the past decade. It has been used in courts to send a number of innocent people to prison. We ask the community refrain from passing judgment on Miss Dixon until they have all of the facts. But family members can't get over all of the heartbreaking medical evidence that has since surfaced. Prosecutors say Hazel was physically tormented for the last 6 months of her life by Dixon while Hazel's father, Brandon Homan, was at work.
That child was walking around in pain for the last 6 months. The skeletal exam they did shows that there was broken hips, broken knees, wrist broken.
A medical examiner pointing to 4 bones that broke and healed, not to mention court documents that cite bruises to her body and at least 2 visits to the hospital for a hand burn and eye injury. Pedersen says his granddaughter was never in the right care, and he blames Child Protective Services.
They took her out of a kind and loving home where she was always happy.
Hazel's father at one point was arrested for domestic violence, causing CPS to step in and take Hazel away. She was with her grandmother up until this summer when she was placed back with Brandon Homan and his girlfriend. Tonight, Pedersen claims CPS received multiple complaints while Hazel was in Dixon's care, but that CPS failed to protect Hazel.
If you go to the hospital, that should be an immediate home visit, and if it's questionable, they should be taken. I'm gonna miss everything about her.
And he says he won't back down until he gets answers from CPS.
I just hope justice is served. You know, I hope that every bad thing that happened to her comes to light.
One of the most emotionally charged moments in the trial came when Brandon Homan took the stand. The courtroom watched as a father faced images of his daughter, videos of Hazel alive, laughing, playing. He struggled to speak. At times he cried. He told the court that he had not understood the full extent of what had been happening in his home. He said he wished he had paid closer attention, that he wished he had responded with the same urgency in earlier incidents, when Hazel had been injured, when concerns had first appeared. He maintained that he had not seen the complete picture. And in a statement that surprised many in the courtroom, he said that Kami Dixon loved Hazel deeply. For some of Hazel's relatives, seated just feet away, those words were difficult to process. They were listening to a father defend the woman accused in connection with his daughter's death.
Mom's not here.
Yeah? What were you just doing?
I'm checking my window.
Other images were shown to the jury to illustrate a caring relationship between 3-year-old Hazel Homan and Cammie Dixon. Dixon is Brandon Homan's girlfriend. In some of the images shown, the child's father says he remembers his daughter walking, running, and smiling with Dixon. She is charged for Hazel's death after the 3-year-old died of a brain injury consistent with shaken baby syndrome in November 2019. Detectives say Dixon had primary care of Hazel while Homan went to work. Court documents say before the brain injury that took her life, Hazel suffered other injuries. This includes bruises all over her body, neck, and groin, and several broken bones revealed by x-rays from the medical examiner's office. When defense attorneys asked Homan about the broken bones, the father said he had no idea.
I was unaware. I'd never seen signs of my daughter in any pain, distress, irritation, or else I would have been on it. Exact same way that when she got something in her eye. Exact same way when she burnt her hand.
Dixon's defense team contends that the little girl's death wasn't the result of abuse, but a tragic accident. They allege the child choked on something, resulting in brain damage and death. The prosecution claims the final deadly injuries can only be explained by abusive head trauma.
Granddaughter, I'll never be able to hold or see or visit with again.
The biological mother's father was the only person who asked the commissioner to set bail at the $2 million the prosecutor requested.
Hazel needs justice.
The others, Cammie Dixon's father and her boyfriend, Hazel's father,
We put our kids first.
pleaded for her release.
I'm not asking for you to understand. I don't understand, but I know that woman's heart. She couldn't do it.
In closing arguments, the prosecution focused on a central question. Not one incident, but many. The case, they argued, relied on a pattern of explanations, each one describing an isolated accident. A burn, an eye injury, a sudden collapse. Individually, each event might have seemed explainable, but together, they formed a pattern. The jury was asked to consider whether all of those incidents could truly be unrelated, or whether they pointed to something more serious. On June 28th, the jury returned with a partial verdict. They reached a decision on one charge, but remained deadlocked on another. Deliberations continued. 2 days later, on June 30th, the jury delivered its final decision. Cammie Dixon was found guilty. The remaining charge was dismissed without prejudice. On August 2nd, the court issued its sentence. 34 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. The decision brought legal closure to the case, but it did not bring resolution to the loss. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. There was no reaction that could match the weight of what had been heard. No outcome that could restore what had been taken. In the aftermath, Hazel's story did not end in the courtroom. Members of her family chose to act. Her aunt, Ashley, became involved in child protection advocacy. She spoke publicly, organized, protested. Her message was direct. The system had to change.
Hazel has been our number one, and that is what we have fought for, and I am so thankful for the jury members, for the prosecutors and their solid case with this, the advocates, everybody, because they have all helped our family to be able to get through this.
Hazel died in November 2019 of a brain injury. During the trial, prosecution showed autopsy reports from the King County Medical Examiner's office revealing Hazel had 50 injuries at various stages of healing. Prosecutors argued the final deadly injuries can only be explained by abusive head trauma. Dixon's defense team argued the little girl's death was a tragic accident of choking on food, causing the brain injury.
The correct verdict was reached today, and we're so thankful.
Many of Hazel's relatives say they didn't know the extent of the abuse because they weren't allowed to be in the courtroom as potential witnesses. Ashley Barnes, Hazel's aunt, says it was hard enough hearing those details during closing arguments, but says she also found it difficult to come face to face with her brother, Brandon Homan, Hazel's father.
I can't wrap my head around how he would fight for his girlfriend's freedom when she is the one that murdered his biological daughter.
Relatives say this justice brings them some closure, but their fight is only beginning outside of the courthouse. They say part of their healing to keep Hazel's name alive is lobbying for change in policy within the State Department of Children, Youth, and Families.
The system is broken in Washington state, and how we protect children in vulnerable situations, and there needs to be changes. We don't need any other child to be lost because the state dropped the ball in protecting her.
In response, changes began to take shape in Washington state. Authorities expanded staffing, hiring additional social workers to reduce case overload. New policies were introduced requiring verification of all adults living in a household with a child, even if they were not legal guardians. Communication protocols between agencies were strengthened, aiming to prevent information from becoming fragmented across departments. Hazel's case began to be used in training programs for future social workers, as an example of what can happen when warning signs are not connected in time. Every year on March 13th, Hazel's family gathers to remember her. Her birthday. There is cake, photos, stories. They remember the little girl who loved music, who loved stickers, who filled ordinary moments with joy. Her life was short, but its impact did not disappear. Because of the changes that followed, other children now receive a higher level of protection. That is part of her legacy. Cases like this leave behind more than grief. They leave behind responsibility. Responsibility to recognize when something feels wrong, when a child suddenly becomes withdrawn, when behavior changes, when fear replaces openness. Those are not always phases. Sometimes they are signals, and sometimes those signals are the only warning anyone will ever see. Hazel Journey Homan is no longer here, but her story continues to matter, not only because of what happened, but because of what can still be prevented. And sometimes the difference between silence and action is everything.